What is the role of a speech therapist or BCBA when supporting students who have difficulties with executive functioning skills? We are getting into that topic today. I had a delightful conversation with Stephanie Howard, who is a BCBA and wife and mother to a neurodiverse son. She is a wealth of information and she's been in the field of ABA for 15 years. She does a wonderful job today talking all about what is executive functions. What does that mean? So, in this episode, you'll get a working definition, a reminder of executive functions. We also talk about assessments. This is the coolest part, assessments for executive functioning skills. And I linked a couple of them that are free, no cost in the show notes. We also talk about some goal examples. She shares one that she uses in her own home, which I love that transparency and how she is using this not only as a professional, but also a parent as well. I can't wait for you to learn with us. I know I learned a lot. This is a great episode. I really want to bring Stephanie back to do a CEU for us in the ABA Speech Connection, our ASHA and ACE CEU membership. In the show notes, I also have a link so you can join us in the ABA Speech Connection. Every single month, we do a new live talk, and we also have a CEU library of over 35 hours of courses that have been perfectly curated for you. Let's get into this conversation with Stephanie Howard. I'm Rose Griffin, a speech therapist, board-certified behavior analyst, and founder of ABA Speech. It wasn't all that long ago that I felt overwhelmed by providing therapy for my autistic students and any students who were not yet speaking. Fast forward through many doubts, tears, research, and courses, and you will see the framework that I use today and share with over 60,000 readers weekly. One that will help you support your students and feel more confident in the process. I created the ABA Speech podcast to give you simple, step-by-step strategies to help you reach all of your students wherever they are on their communication journeys. If you're a speech therapist, BCBA, RBT student, or parent who's looking to help all students develop a way to communicate with the world, you are in the right place, friend. Let's get started. Welcome to the show. We have a great guest with us today. We have with us Stephanie Howard. Welcome, Stephanie, to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
I'm excited because we are going to talk about executive functioning skills, and we have not talked about this topic in a really long time. I was telling her that in season 1, we had Sarah Ward on, who's a speech therapist, who's magnificent and talks about executive functioning. And I actually got to hear her. We brought her into Ohio for this really cool conference. She was the keynote, and I got to introduce her. That was really fun. It's fun to meet people in real life that you've had on your podcast because you know how conferences are, even if you're at the same conference, to be able to connect. Depending on how big that conference is, it's hard, right?
It is very difficult.
It is really hard. So, my son was diagnosed as having ADHD in this past fall. I haven't talked about it a ton. It's not a secret, but I've been doing my own research on just executive functioning skills, ADHD. And it's interesting because speech therapists don't always support and serve students with ADHD. It's not always just part of what I really never learned about ADHD as a speech therapist, to be completely honest, until we got that diagnosis. Then I was like, messaging a bunch of ADHD influencers on Instagram about what books I should read. And so I did. And I feel very empowered, but I think it's something that we just don't talk about enough. So thank you for coming on to the show and talking about it. Did you want to share something about
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And you have somebody in your family that has ADHD. Is that how you got into researching executive functioning?
Yes. So my son was diagnosed when he was 5 years old. I knew when he was 2.
Wow, that's a young diagnosis, I feel like.
I knew immediately. I can remember him being like 18 months, 2 years old, saying to my BCBA friend, he's going to get a diagnosis, and then being like, you're just being a BCBA. And I'm like, no,
Right.
I'm not. He's going to get a diagnosis. And when he was about 4 years old, we started him with OT, and it was the best decision of my life.
Yeah.
I joke with my OT, who we've had for 3 years. I say to her, "You tell me to jump, and I'm going to ask you how high."
Right.
We used to, bedtime used to take us 3.5 hours. I used to start
Wow.
at 8 o'clock, and 10:30 or 11 o'clock, he would finally fall asleep, and he still doesn't sleep through the night. And
Wow.
so I started the process of, I know that it takes a long time to get that diagnosis and to get in to see a provider.
Yeah.
Um, so right before he turned 5, he got his assessment done, and
Yeah.
she didn't officially diagnose him until the day after his 5th birthday.
Okay.
But what really made me go down the rabbit hole was he has a high IQ.
Okay.
It is
Oh.
above one standard deviation above the mean, but his executive functioning scoring within that testing was at an 85 standardized score. And
Oh.
I know what that means. And
Yeah.
so I said, okay, I got to work on this. And I just dove in feet first. It has completely changed the way I practice
Yeah.
because now I understand a little bit more about the brain and a little bit more about those deficits. And I say a little bit because we never stop learning. We never should stop learning. And so I do a lot of programming for executive functioning now.
That's awesome. And I know I just had somebody on the podcast. He goes by Dr. Matt. He is a PhD and he has ADHD and he wrote a book. I believe it's called the Neurodiversity Playbook. And he talks about twice exceptional learners, which that's what your son would be considered, right? With the
Yes.
gifted and the okay. And I feel like my whole background is like really helping kids who are emerging communicators. So for me to like learn all these new things is great because now when I'm in classes, I still work 2 days a week clinically in my kids' own school, which has been really nice, especially with getting that diagnosis. My son needed some support this year. It's nice to be there and working with everybody. But I go into classrooms now or just see kids and I'm like, I bet that kid has ADHD because once you really dive into what the characteristics are, or ADHD or ADD, you see it and it's like it affects
Yes.
so many people, right? You just don't even realize it when it's not part of your lived experience or your family's. You just don't realize it.
Well, even myself, the more I see him and the more I see what he struggles with, the more I look at myself
Right.
and the more I see what I struggle with and what
Right.
executive functionings for me I overcompensate for.
Yeah.
It's been a very eye-opening experience.
Yeah, it's a journey. So, for those of us that might be new to that term executive functions, can you kind of just give us a working definition of what that means?
Sure. Executive functions or executive functioning, it's a set of skills and they contribute to a structured, meaningful, productive thought process. And so your brain relies on these skills to organize, prioritize, and rationalize your thinking.
Wow.
So, like, fundamentally, it is restricting your body from acting without thinking.
Oh,
And if
wow.
we break it down into even further from an ABA perspective, it's really managing your own behavior.
Yeah, self-monitoring. There's so much that goes into that because I think that's what a lot of kids struggle with. And then they get brought up to, like, I'll see people, I spend too much time on social media. I don't need to. I have people that help me with it. And I'm on a social media behavior plan. I actually have a Google Sheet and I swear I log how much time I'm on Instagram every week. I'm trying to reduce it by 50% of the baseline. You know what I'm saying? Like any
Yes.
good BCBA would. But people will say things like, oh, this kid has all these behaviors or they're not attending. And I just want to know, like, do they have ADHD? Like, has anybody thought about that? Because that really, ADHD can manifest itself in so many ways. Like you said, like social emotional learning. Kids could have problems with problem behavior. They can have problems with attention. There's so many different things that can be affected. And I think it manifests itself in different ways. And I know as a BCBA part of my coursework, I mean, I never really learned anything about ADHD. Did you?
Nope.
I know. Okay. I want to make sure I
Not a
wasn't alone.
thing.
Okay. I went to a great program, but I didn't learn about ADHD. So I think this is such a needed topic. So, what assessments can we use for executive functioning skills? Are there assessments out there that we can utilize to help us know? Like, we know some kids are really struggling with these things, and really, more from the BCBA part of my life, I think we could support learners like this. I feel like not as many kids who have ADHD may need speech, but definitely BCBA services.
100%. So we don't have any ABA, and maybe we do, and I just don't know about them. I should
Right.
start with that.
Right. Yeah.
So if you, and I can link these or you can
Yeah.
link them, I'll send you all of them. So I primarily use four. The first one that I have is a lifeskillsadvocate.com. It's a free executive functioning assessment. It is a super easy questionnaire that you can either do with your learner or with their parents. And then I do them every 6 months to see if the score increases.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, there is a wonderful resource and it's completely free. It's reproducible for teaching and tracking. It is called the Executive Skills Questionnaire by Peg Dawson and Richard Greer. I think I'm saying his name wrong. But this one I love because it has skills tracking. It has different environmental modifications that you can make. It has different teaching strategies for whatever that skill or skill deficit might be. And then it comes with statements and questions and prompts that you can use when you're working through whatever that issue is with that learner.
Oh, yes. I read a book by her. I
It,
tried to get that lady on my podcast, but I think she's retired now. So,
keep trying,
yeah,
keep going.
it's good information, though. I know I read something. I don't know if I saw that or a book or something, but I was like, oh my gosh, yes, this is great. This is
It
good
is like a
information.
49-page
Oh my God.
resource that is just
Yeah,
amazing.
that's awesome. Yeah.
The brief too is also something that you could do for an assessment for executive functioning skills. And then I stumbled upon this last one and did it on myself. It's the
Okay.
Novo Psych. This is for people ages 14 and up, but you really get to, it's all done online and then it'll score it for you. It'll tell you where you are struggling the most and where you are not struggling the least.
Oh,
And that one's been really cool because I started thinking that maybe I have ADHD, and then I did that and I said, you probably have
yeah.
ADHD.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so I think a little something for everybody in a lot of those resources. Yeah, we'll make sure to link some of those in the show notes. So thanks for sharing that because I think
Of
that's the
course.
thing is that you're like, okay, I know this is an issue, right? Like the kids getting sent down to the office or they have to work with a guidance counselor, or they're getting brought up to the behavior committee in the building because people, it's like a mystery, right? Executive functioning skills. Like, what do we do here? If there's no assessment, we don't know how to plan for it. And then whose responsibility is to help support it? If the kid's on a 504, that's great, but it's
And
hard.
even I think that a lot of these kids, so you can have executive dysfunction if you have autism, if you have ADHD, trauma,
Right.
we'll
Yeah.
we'll do that.
Yeah.
But just speaking from an ADHD standpoint, I think a lot of people think that ADHD is really just a behavior disorder, and it's not. The
Oh,
behavior disorder happens when you don't know how to treat the ADHD because it's different than any type of discipline. It's different teaching.
hmm.
It's different the way that I treat discipline my son with ADHD and the way I would discipline a child without ADHD are completely separate. And so I
Yeah.
think because a lot of people don't know what ADHD really is and what it means and how to best teach and help these kids, you
Yes.
end up with needing the behavior team
Right.
because at that point, you've
Right.
done everything potentially not the right way. And now
Yeah.
somebody needs to step in and we kind of need to retrain.
Oh yeah, and I mean I feel like for kids, I mean school can feel like a war zone if you don't have the right support. And the reason that my son got diagnosed is we just always thought something was going on there. We weren't sure exactly, and we just did the Vanderbilt screeners, which is like through our pediatrician, and
Mhm.
that's how it all kind of came about. But I can see how this manifests itself. Like if a parent isn't really thinking that this is happening with the child or doesn't know, and then the child isn't getting the right supports in school, like you said, it's almost like going to school is like a war zone for kids with ADHD, right? And
Mhm.
there's so many kids that have it, and I'm just like, we need to talk about this more. So thanks for coming on,
Of
Stephanie.
course.
This is a good conversation. So what do you think could be some goal examples for executive functioning? I know that's kind of broad, but I think for BCBAs that are listening to this or and they're thinking like, oh, this kid has this. And even as a speech language pathologist, I remember some kids I worked with in middle school who also had support from a special education teacher, like a resource teacher. Like these are
Mhm.
kids that are going into general education classes, but they have a resource period and they have an intervention specialist that's helping to support their academic curriculum. I remember when I had Sarah Ward on, I had a student and she helped me come up with this really great. I mean, I didn't say, "Hey, Sarah, can you help me with this goal?" But as we were having a conversation, it was all about this visual planning, like the steps that need to take
Yes.
place to get to the end goal and how do we visualize it. And after that podcast, I wrote a stellar IEP goal for this kid because this was all new to me. And I think that we just don't know much about it, you know?
Yeah, so I have goals that I use with my own kid that I decided to just kind of pull up for here, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about even there are some curriculums that I use
Okay.
also that I'm
Yeah.
happy to talk through. So
Okay.
um one of the biggest issues my own child had was emotional regulation. This is a kid that would go to school all day, mask, hold it together, and then
Yeah.
he'd come home and throw these major meltdowns. And they're not tantrums. We know the difference between a tantrum and a
Right.
meltdown. These were not tantrums. He would
Right.
go 2 hours screaming his head off.
Oh.
The neighbors would text me and be like, "Is he okay? Yes, he's fine. He just has to let it out."
Right.
And it took me a long time in partnership with his OT on how to help him control his behavior. So
Yeah.
one of the goals that I wrote for him was when faced with a situation known to increase behaviors of concern, he will demonstrate the ability to control his emotions and his behavior 90% of the time across 5 consecutive sessions. So for us right now, that is turning off Minecraft.
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, trigger warning. Yeah, that's hard.
It is,
Uh,
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about ADHD is that kids with ADHD can't attend. It's not true. They
right.
can't regulate their attending. And so
Yeah.
he could play video games for 8 hours, as I know a bunch of kids can. I know that's not an ADHD thing. But the second I say to him, it's time to close the computer because we have to do literally anything else, is a huge meltdown. So we
Yeah.
do timers and countdowns and take deep
Right.
breaths before we shut that computer off. And we're
Yeah.
working through that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's a great life skill, right? Because if it's today, it's Minecraft, but in 5 years, it's going to be something different. So you're
Yes.
teaching him the skills to deal with those things and to just know yourself. Like, this is a trigger for me. And, like I always feel bad about back in the day. I don't know if you remember that intervention that's like, what's the size of the problem? You have, and I used to do this. Now, I did put my compassionate spin on it because,
Okay.
but what I realized now in hindsight is that I may perceive your problem as a 1, but you're reacting like a 5 because I have a neurotypical brain and it doesn't phase me, whatever it is, right? But we're not inside the kid's brain. So what's perceived as a 5 or whatever that scale was, I'm not saying that's the worst thing in the world, but I'm just saying like we need to think compassionately about some of these interventions because it's the kid's perception of the
And
problem,
my
right?
son has called me out on that. And he is the reason I don't use this is because I
Right.
said to him that, that's a 3. Like your
Right.
reaction is a 3, but this problem is a 1. And he'll look at me and he'll be like, but it's a 3 to me. And the one time he said that, or he only had to tell me once, I was
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
got it. And you have the language to tell me that. And so when I look at my
Yes.
other kids who don't have the language to tell me that, I learned a lot that day.
Yes, right. Yes, I know. I should make an that's a good Instagram post. I should make that. Because some of those, I think when we know better, we do better. And so I think
Yes.
having these dialogues and kind of analyzing the treatments that we use is really important. Okay, so that's cool. So did you say there you have some that's thank you for sharing that very specific goal. So are there curriculums out there that you like? Like we have an autism IEP goal bank. We'll link it in the show notes. It has almost 500 goals, and one of them is a whole section on executive functioning. But are there other curriculums that you like to use that people might just hear about and can Google?
So I really like flexible and focused.
Okay, I haven't heard of that. Okay.
It is ABA based, but they are working through all of these executive functioning or dysfunctioning. I also really like that when I'm working with parents to help break down some of these dysfunctions and what they can do to help their learners. I have also used the ropes curriculum, which is also for executive functioning.
Okay.
One of the things that I tend to do is I will usually I'll test them on one of these assessments, and then I'll write a goal that says like Wesley will increase his score by 5 points. And then
Yeah.
I like to use games to teach executive functioning. I
Good.
have an executive functioning workbook that
Oh,
has so many cool games to work on different things like impulse control. We'll read a book,
yeah.
but they're not allowed to say a certain word that shows up a lot in the book because you want to do it.
Right.
But if the rule of the game is that you can't, they have to control that impulse. Or I have learners who love to talk about specific things. Let's say cars are one of them. You could talk about cars, but you're not allowed to name any cars in that
Yeah.
conversation. And so we're working on executive functioning in a fun way.
Yeah, I like that. Kind of like gamification. We're going to have a
Yes.
CEU in our membership, the ABA Speech Connection, about gamification. And I think that I always say my tagline is sometimes on the podcast is let's make it fun and functional, because it is functional, right? The whole skill, understanding why you're utilizing that, but to make it fun. And I can imagine that kids would think that is a challenge to do some of those things.
Especially kids with ADHD, you have to gamify everything. It's the only way to get anything done.
Right.
You cannot sit these kids down and think that you're going to do some sort of a trial at the table. I promise you it's not going to work. It's
Right.
it's so interesting because we have the same exact things to do every single morning before school, but we can never do them the same way
Oh,
2 days
wow.
in a row. And so in
Yeah.
my house, we have like 5 different ways that we get dressed in the
Yeah.
morning.
Oh,
Some days
wow.
he does it himself. Days I do it for him. There are
Yeah.
days when we try to beat the clock. There are
Oh,
days where
wow.
I time him to see how long it takes. There are days when he goes and gets dressed at the same time as me to see who's
Yeah.
going to win. He always
Oh.
wins
Yes.
because I also want to avoid a meltdown first thing in the morning. But
Yes.
in my house, and I have found with my kids that have ADHD, I have to gamify everything. It's the only way to get through things because they
Yeah.
get bored so
Right.
fast.
Right.
And that
Yes.
boredom leads to problem behavior.
Yeah, I know. My son always struggles in the month of May. That's always hard. I think he's like just done with being
Done.
done with school, and there's no point. I remember one year I bought like every specials teacher a very nice present because it was really, really hard. And I think sometimes our kids don't see the value in, well, why do I have to do this? It doesn't make
Mhm.
sense. And sometimes as humans, there's certain things we have to do because we have to do them, right? And that's a hard life lesson to learn. I love that. So what do you think the role is of a BCBA in supporting students with ADHD? I don't feel like that's talked about enough.
I think we should be supporting them more.
Yeah, right.
Um, of course, that's as a parent with ADHD, but really helping people understand the difference between antecedents and consequences, particularly within interventions, because we as a society do a lot of that consequent intervention. And while with our kids with autism, that works beautifully for most of them, it doesn't for a kid with ADHD. So you need to manipulate the environment and you need to do a lot of antecedent interventions, whether that
Yeah,
be visuals or timers.
yeah,
People with ADHD have time blindness. They don't know whether 5 minutes have passed or 50 minutes have passed. And so
right.
using a timer, writing things out are
Hmm.
all super, super important warnings.
Yes, I do priming. I do a lot of that. I like the idea because that's the thing too, is like sometimes people can say, like, I feel like I have so much to do and I don't have enough time to do it. The idea
Mhm.
of time blindness, that's really something that if your brain is working like a neurotypical brain, I don't think you understand those things. If you're supporting a kid with ADHD, it's so important to well, we're hoping to offer some CEU courses around this topic because I just think that it's so important. And I feel like sometimes as a BCBA, if you don't know much about ADHD, you may not feel like, ooh, maybe that's not my role, or maybe that's somebody else is going to do that. But I feel like, especially, we've been talking a lot about school-based BCBAs. So BCBAs that are employees of the district. That's not always how it was. It was more that consultant model, right? A
Right.
clinical consultant comes in. But now districts, even my little hometown country district here in Ohio, has a BCBA on staff as an employee, which I think is great for a lot of reasons. But I think that people don't know what they don't know, and they're not supporting kids who may not have all these behaviors if we just get some things in place, you know?
Yeah, even, prompting, priming, task lists, doing a task analysis and teaching kids and adults, how do you break down this task even further?
Yeah.
Reinforcement systems are huge, but you have to
Yeah.
be careful because they don't care about consequences. I mean, my son
Right.
could care less about a consequence.
Right.
Caregiver education, I think, is really important. And I will die on this hill. Multidisciplinary collaboration. If you are not collaborating with everybody, you are doing it wrong. And I'll say that over and over again.
Yeah.
Yes, ABA therapists and BCBAs, the science itself is beautiful,
Yeah.
but for executive dysfunction, it's more than just behavior. It's really understand what's happening in the brain,
Yes.
and that you need OTs and you need your speech therapist to help
Yeah.
you with that.
Yeah.
That is not our scope. We can do the antecedent interventions, but we really need to work together.
Yeah, I love that. I'm glad that you have an OT in your life that supports you, and it sounds like she's transformative. That's your
She
person.
gets
Yes.
whatever she wants in this world.
That's awesome. I'm gonna have an OT BCBA on soon, but I had one of my friends, just life friends, is a PhD level OT, but we met working in specialized programs for autistic learners, and so I feel like her take on OT and regulation and sensory is all just so different. And it's so needed. Like that's the thing is that every discipline can help to inform our therapeutic practice. And it doesn't mean if an OT gives you some type of strategy that it's not on the task list. I think sometimes people get really nervous about that. Maybe people new to the profession too. Do you think that's true in your
I
lived
definitely think
experience?
that's true. I think it's dinosaurs like myself that have a harder time with some of those interventions. But what I always advise people is collect data. Let the data
Yes.
speak for it. And
Yeah.
I can understand a kid is upset. The OT says maybe you need to brush them at that point and you don't want, fine.
I know, right? It's a classic
Use it
scenario.
as
Yeah.
an antecedent intervention, brush
Right.
them before, take data. Does it help?
Right.
And don't take
Yes.
data once because that's not enough. Collect data over a few days and see if it helps. My kid needs squeezes. I can tell when he is overwhelmed.
Right.
I will lay on that boy. I do these.
Right.
They taught me, my OT taught me some cool calming techniques and
Right.
they work.
Yeah.
My kid pushes buckets. It works for him.
Right.
It calms him down.
Right.
Do I have hard data for that? No.
Right.
Do I need hard data for that? No.
Right. It's in your home, but I understand. Like we always talk about this article by Dr. Matthew Broadhead. It's almost 10 years now, but it's actually navigating non-behavioral treatment recommendations. But he has this really awesome flow chart. I just had him on my podcast too. I'm like, you wrote this article 10 years ago, and I do it in all my ethics trainings because I think that is really hard for BCBAs. And one of the things that Dr. Broadhead says is like, can that intervention be put into behavioral terms? So, I mean, you're not maybe taking data on this because it's your child and it's your home, but you
I
could take
could.
it. Yeah, you could, right?
I could, and I feel very strong that my data would support what
Right.
I'm being asked to do.
Yeah. So let the data make the decisions. I love that. And when I was in all these contentious meetings, I had this admin job in Austin, Texas, which I love that job. But, sometimes you're in these really horrendous, contentious meetings. And I'd say, like, let's just look at the data and let's make some decisions because people get so emotionally charged about stuff. And it's like, let's take a step back. We want to help the kid, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? We're here to help children. Okay. Well, it sounds like you're doing such amazing work, and I would love to have you come back, do a CEU for us in the ABA Speech Connection, because I
I
think
would
this
love
is
that.
such a great topic, and one that hits close to home for you and me. So thank you so much for coming on. And where can people find out more about you and your work? Do you have I think I found you on LinkedIn. You're active on LinkedIn.
I'm active on LinkedIn. I am the ILABA conference coordinator, so you
Oh,
can
neat.
find me at ILABA.
Oh, cool.
You can go on Behavior Live. I have a talk that I did for Oregon ABA this year and Tennessee ABA this year. And if you're looking specifically for a behavior plan
Yeah.
for somebody with ADHD, watch the Tennessee ABA
Oh, neat.
talk. I have an entire behavior plan because it looks different.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming on. It was great to talk with you.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me.